When I realised that all it takes to catch large carp from a large lake is a single bait on a basic mono rig cast as far as I can possibly manage, it was a turning point in my angling. Catching one was a massive buzz, I can tell you. But when I went on to repeat this seemingly magical feat session after session, some days I'd have 5 in a day. It was crazy fishing. If you can get going with this approach, then it will take your confidence to a whole new level. You really will be able to go to any water and catch any carp that takes your fancy. It's a game changer. So what rig should you use if you're fishing a fairly large, low stock venue with a clean bottom? In terms of rig choice, there are 2 things to consider: what material and then what rig. On a large lake, I'd forget about coated braids and supple braids. You're going to be fishing at range most of the time. Supple braids are going to tangle really badly unless you put the whole lot inside a solid PVA bag. If the lake's over 10 acres, the carp are going to be very mobile, and casting solid PVA bags at fish that are used to doing the off is never going to be a good plan. The only time I'd use a solid PVA bag on a big water is if you're trying to combat weed. Otherwise, I think a solid bag is going to work against you. The other material I wouldn't bother with is a coated braid. They just don't add anything to your fishing. If you use a coated braid with a bottom bait, your presentation can be absolutely rude because they sit horribly on the bottom. You can solve this problem with a wafter, of course, but there's actually a much simpler solution. All you actually need to be successful on large low stock venues is a mono hair rig and a bottom bait straight out the bag. One of the things I love about mono rigs is that they're very anti-tangle and they reset every time. On a large lake with a smaller number of carp, there are bound to be other species, and those are the ones that are going to find your rig first, pick it up and interfere with it, and they could absolutely ruin your chances of a bite from a carp unless that rig is resetting reliably every time. So these are a few variations that I've used on really big waters. So this is 0.50 snag leader with a size 6 shod twister, and I've got a little hook bead holding the wraps in place so that that doesn't move at all, and it also pins the anchor point, so that works really well. This is 0.60 over here, and I've paired that with a size 6 shod claw, and the reason why I use the shod claw with a 0.60 is that these might be the same size hooks, but the size 6 claw has got a much bigger eye than the shod twister. I can just about make that material work with the shod twister, but it's easier to do the knotless knot in this situation with this combination of hook and hook link. Again, just a little hook bead holding the wraps in place. Over here I've got the 0.50 again with the size 6 twister, and instead of a hook bead I've used a little blowback tube there. It's doing exactly the same thing in the same way, so either of those options work. Possibly a slightly less aggressive angle that it's kicking out the hair there, but you know, that's not going to make much difference at all. As long as it's there, that's the important thing. And over here I've got the 0.60 with a size 6 shod claw, and again a little blowback tube. And if I didn't have these blowback tubes or these hook beads in place, then, well, I'll show you what's going to happen. That's just going to unravel. So if I pull one of these blowback tubes out of position, you can see the gaps there have opened up in the wraps. I've lost the exit angle on the hair there, so that's now exiting off to one side. It's also exiting much flatter, and I've lost that kick. So just by pulling that up tight, putting the blowback tube in position, I pin that really neatly together, and it's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere in flight or when it's on the bottom fishing for you. So when I first started tying this rig, I used a hook bead, but in more recent years I've moved over to the blowback tube, and the reason why I actually prefer a blowback tube now over the hook bead is that these last longer. Hook beads are a bit more delicate, than plastic is softer, and they can split open after you've used them half a dozen times, but I find the blowback tubes just more robust and they last through many captures. In terms of material, I'd use mono between 0.4 and 0.5 millimeters in diameter. Anything thinner than that is not going to give you the tangle resistance that you need for fishing consistently at ranges of 100 yards or more, which you're bound to have to do on a large lake. So my session yesterday is a prime example of how to keep your fishing simple and yet effective. I took myself off to a park lake. I'd visited the lake before for a walk around, but I'd never fished it, so completely blind. It's a 6-hectare public lake. There's no boats or anything, but you've got your general kind of park life going on all around you. I have no idea of the stock. I have no idea whether it's an easy water or on a hard water, but it was a midweek afternoon session and there was no other anglers there at all, so I had 6 hectares of water to myself. I hadn't done any pre-baiting, I hadn't done any feature finding, I literally going completely blind. So my approach was this: 3 basic mono hair rigs, 24mm baits, a little PVA crumb stick, and I just dip that in some syrup before I wang it out. So I've got 3 identical rigs. I'm not umming and ahhing, do I need a pop-up, do I need a wafter? I've just got 3 bog standard bottom baits, and I wang them out on 3 different lines out to where I think the carp might be. I didn't move them around, I didn't touch them at all. I put them out there and I sat on my hands until something happened. I'd had quite a few false indications from diving birds swimming through my lines, which gets the old heart racing a bit, but other than that I'd seen a few kind of bubbles, but there was still very quiet, and I really didn't think it was going to happen. But then out of the blue, my left-hander pulled up tight and I simply wound down, lifted into him, and it was game on. So I see a few comments in social media criticising mono rigs, they're only good for 1 fish. Whereas they see that as a negative, I actually think that that's the reason why you should be using mono rigs, because they force you to tie a new one, and by tying a new one you're going to maximise your chances of catching another one, getting that second take. So this is the rig that caught the carp yesterday. This is big thick mono. This is 0.60 because I have no idea what I was facing, and I can just feel there's a little bit of a nick there. Yeah, there's definitely a little bit of damage. Now that damage is fractional. There's no way that it's damaged the integrity of this mono, but I still wouldn't use it again. But I can clearly see just with the naked eye, if I just run my nail up there, the point of that hook has gone. I don't even need an eyeglass to spot that. I wouldn't even attempt to resharpen that. It's real simple. That's in the bin. I'm going to recycle that little blowback tube. That rig material, I've used 40-50 centimetres of mono to tie that rig, and that's about 6 centimes. That's 5 pence. If that was fluoro, it would be more like 30 pence or 40 pence worth of material. So by binning this mono, it might seem wasteful, but in terms of financial cost, it's very low indeed. The expensive thing and the most important thing is that hook. That hook for me is done. It's done its job, and there's no way that I would try and use it again. I've also seen some comments on social media about people that have used the twisters and criticising them because they're only good for 1 fish. Well, yeah, they are, and that's a good thing. If your hook is actually capable of doing multiple captures, for me in my fishing, it's not sharp enough to start with. If it's working for you, then great, but when you start to fish for larger carp and really hard to catch carp, the hooks that you're using might not be good enough. But I know that the twisters absolutely are, because the carp that we have here have very hard mouths, and the public lake fish as well that I fish for, they're eating mussels and crays, and they've got big bony mouths, and trying to get a hook hold on fish of that nature, wilder fish, is quite difficult. You need a really sharp hook. Don't worry if you struggle to find material that's labelled as hook link that's rated between 0.4 and 0.5 millimeters in diameter. It's probably originally designed to be mainline or a snag leader, but there's absolutely no reason why you can't use these materials for hook link. As long as the mono is around that diameter, it's going to work as a hook link. I'd kind of ignore whatever the rated break-in strain says on the tin. What matters is diameter. Now of course, yes, you could use fluoro to do this job, but you just don't need it. It's expensive and it really doesn't add anything to your fishing whatsoever. For any given diameter, it's also much stiffer than mono, and personally I just prefer something a little bit more supple. Whether you use mono or fluoro, what you've got to remember is that mono rigs are only good for one fish, and then you got to bin them. If you hate rig tying, you're probably going to hate mono rigs, but I love them because practice makes perfect, and by tying up mono rigs you'll get really good at it. A simple mono rig with a sharp hook is all you need to catch a carp. All you got to do is keep tying fresh rigs to keep on catching. So I've just rocked up at a brand new venue. It's a massive 100 hectares, that's about 200 plus acres. I've walked around this before, I've kind of driven around it because it's too big to walk, but I've never actually fished it before. I fancy giving it a go, so where on earth do you start on a venue this large? Well, that's always positive. I've actually found another angler. Alright, he's not carp fishing, but it might be a start. Well, that's really good information. That it's always handy to talk to other anglers, even if they're not carpers, because you never know what information you're going to find out. It's not a very popular spot with carpers, but he said there's everything in here, and there's definitely some carp in here. Yeah, going to be a challenge. I have no idea where to start still. He didn't give me any kind of particular pointers. He didn't say that there's any real kind of spot where it's best to go or anything, but hey, we'll have a wander around, we'll see what we can see. We might find someone else to chat to. It's always good to keep your eyes peeled to the ground when the level's down on a big reservoir like this. Obviously a crayfish claw, and I know that there's going to be crays in here, so there's no point in rocking up to here with small baits or soft baits. You've got to go with this something large and rock hard. It'll be 24mm salt cured Scopex squid for me. There's some massive boulders down here. Got some depth information already from that angler. At 30 yards he says he's fishing in 3 metres of water already. It's got good depth to it, this place, which is always interesting, always good for carp fishing if you can find a water with some depth. Well, that's quite interesting. I've come up to one end and I'm just feeling the wind blowing straight into my face. Now, bearing in mind that I'm fancying a crack at this water tomorrow, if I can put myself on the end of a wind on a big water like this, carp will follow the wind. They're going to be on the end of it probably. Well, that's a positive sign as well. Freshwater clams are a really good indication of water quality, and wherever I found freshwater clams, I've normally found good sized carp. So yeah, very positive. Just a leading rod, that's all you need. Just have a little donk around, see what's out there. I was surprised by this area actually. It feels quite nice. It's a little bit soft, it's not firm and gravelly, but if I wind back in probably about 40 yards, there's some hazards to avoid. I bumped a few big rocks just on the way back in, but if I fish beyond that, then about 70 yards, then it felt okay actually. Access is not bad. Little walk to the car, but it's really not too bad. This place is just absolutely stunning. It's big, it's wild, it's fantastic. I haven't seen another angler yet. I've stopped at a few little parking spaces and stuff trying to find access. It's always a difficult thing to just find somewhere to park and even access the water on these big places. I found the main barrage, which is a good place to start. Fish love structure, could certainly give it a go here. Well, I'm running out of time today. I'm going to have to take a punt on it somehow. I found another barrage. It's a bit shallower, but there are plenty of small fish here. And the guys that the second group of guys that I met told me that this side's more popular with the carpers because there's basically less hidden tree trunks in the water and stuff. I have no idea how it's going to go, but we'll spray some baits out from this corner in front of this barrage here and see what occurs. I think that was just a pike, but there's fish here. So I've probably put out about 1.5 kilos and I've just sprayed it in a big arc. I'm not fishing a spot, I'm just trying to kind of create a zone that I can get the carp to come in and have a little snack on. I've picked a corner where I can fish from. I'm not having to fish very far out, you know, it's probably only going to be a 70 yard chuck, something like that, so little 9-foot scope's going to be absolutely fine for that kind of work. So all I've got to hope now is that when I rock up tomorrow there's not another angler in that swim, and we're good to go. There might not even be any carp in this section, I have no idea. It's an absolute punt, but that is what makes it proper exciting. When carp anglers talk about rigs, they're always talking about the bit from the swivel to the hook. But for me, there's much more to rigs than that. When I talk about carp rigs, I always include the lead system, because having the right lead system can make or break the success of a rig. You absolutely do not need to use a lead clip in this situation. There's no weed, so you don't need to drop the red. Just use a running ledger. I'd always advise you to try and use the lightest lead that you can possibly get away with for the distance that you need. If you need to get them out as far as possible, then yes, you're going to have to use a 4-ounce lead. But if you can get to where the fish are with a 3-ounce, a 2-ounce or even a 1-ounce, then do so. Lighter leads will cast a decent range and they go in the water with much less impact than a big lead. By making less of an impact with a lead, you're less likely to spook any carp that are present in the area to begin with. This is just going to increase the chances that you have. I know you might find it hard to believe that using a 1-ounce lead can hook a carp just as well as a 4-ounce lead, but if you switch over to running leads, then that's absolutely the case. They work brilliantly. You do not need big leads to hook carp. I always fish with a semi-tight clutch when I'm using running rigs. I'm actually using the power of the clutch to hook the carp for me. The clutch is capable of delivering far more hooking force than any lead will ever give you, many times. This is why I can get away with fishing with very light leads and a simple running ledger. If the bottom is fairly clean, then all you need is a bottom bait straight out the bag. If you're introducing some freebies, they're going to be sitting on the bottom anyway. So why on earth would we want our actual rig to sit any higher than the free baits that we're introducing? You could of course use a wafter, but I've never bought into this concept of you need a wafter because the wafter counteracts the weight of the hook. Hooks weigh so little, it really is so negligible. If you've got a rig that pancakes flat with a bottom bait, then you don't need a wafter. If I'm fishing short to medium range, it's always nice to add a little PVA stick of crumb, maybe with a stick mix or a few pellets, dipped in some syrup before I cast out. But if you do this when you're fishing long range, you're going to cut down massively how far you can launch that rig. If you're not on the fish, then you may as well not be there. Gaining the confidence to launch a single bottom bait out into the middle of a very large lake takes some doing, it really does, but it's absolutely possible. I've caught so many carp just on singles on massive lakes as well. Get in that net! Oh, absolutely buzzing with that one. Never fished here before, only had a proper look at it and explore yesterday. I've rocked up, I've chucked out 3 Scopex squid and I've had one. It only took about an hour. Bloody brilliant. Well, I'm absolutely delighted with this one. I had zero expectations of this water. Bit of pre-baiting the day before. Fire out 3 singles. And to have a take within an hour. That's mad. And what a cracker. What an absolute little brammer. Long, lean fighting machine. Love it. Single 24mm Scopex squid, mono hair rig and a running rig. That's all I ever do nowadays, really. So simple, absolutely deadly. Brilliant, let's get him back. Fishing big waters like this can be very daunting at first, but at the end of the day, carp are carp. Nothing's different about them. All you've got to do is pluck up the courage, get out there, lob some baits out and sit behind them for long enough. Well, he's as slippery as a bar of soap, this one. Long, lean fighting machine, about the same size as the other one, but who cares when they look like that, went like stink. Mouth is very good. I'm just going to put a bit of Medicarp on him anyway. Tiniest little pinprick in the corner from the barbless. Lovely, let's slip him back. One of the secrets to success on big waters is to have absolute confidence in what you're doing. You know, I've got total faith in my rigs, in my bait. I don't chop and change. I don't fish pop-ups, I don't fish wafters. I have 3 bottom baits. I lob them out generally as far as I can and try and get some bait over them. That's it. I just don't need to make it more complicated than that. It works. And that'll be number 2 in the net. Different spot this time, that was the left-hander. Absolute ripper of a take. And that's number 3 in the back of the net. This is possibly the smallest carp I've caught in a very, very long time, but he's absolutely stunning. Lightly scaled fish. He's going to go on to do big things in this water, I reckon. So yeah, bloody brilliant. One of the other challenges of large low stock lakes is that there are probably other species in there, species that you really don't want to catch. Could be chub, could be bream. I've even had to contend with massive roach. Using large 24mm baits is all well and good to avoid these accidental captures, but it's still no good if the 24mm straight out of the bag are just not hard enough. They might be getting annihilated within the first few hours of being out there on the bottom. One option, of course, is to use a bait wrap or some armour mesh, something like that, to protect the baits and just use the baits that you've got. I've used glug baits in the past, make them really rock hard that way. That's an option. My kind of go-to, my favourite method nowadays is just to air dry and then salt cure my own baits, because it's a really cheap and effective way of making the baits as hard and as tough as I need them to be. When you're starting to get to know a new big water, I definitely advise that you wind in at least one rod every 4 hours, just to see what's going on. There's nothing worse than putting a load of effort into your fishing, then only to realise that you're getting absolutely annihilated and you didn't even have a bait on the spot after the first few hours because it was completely gone. What really matters when you're fishing large low stock venues is location. If you don't know where the fish are or where they might be next, then you may as well not be there. My go-to approach in these situations is always going to be casting a single to showing fish. If you feel the need to boost the power of a single bait, then yes, use a glug, use a dip. Dips and sprays and glug work great. They really do boost the power of the food signal, and they don't add to the aerodynamic drag, so they don't limit your casting range. I've caught loads of big carp on massive lakes using nothing more than casting singles to where I believe the fish are going to rock up. It takes a huge amount of confidence to be able to do this, but I tell you what, once you've done it once and been successful, the buzz is massive. Finding the fish on large lakes can be a challenge. On certain lakes they just don't show very often, so it can be really, really hard. If I've got nothing to go on, then I would always aim to put myself on the end of whatever wind that was blowing, preferably a nice big southerly. When tackling large lakes, timing is everything. I know from past experience that my chances of success on large waters is so much better if I can get on the end of a southerly. So I tend to time my trips for when the weather is right, pushing in to a certain bank. I know the fish are going to be there. Even if I can't see them, all I've got to do is be there on the end of that wind and then smash some singles out into the distance just as far as I can possibly do. If I'm going to invest some serious time in a venue, then I definitely use boilies. There's really not much point in using particles or pellets, because any other species in there are going to be the first on them, clear you out, and it just doesn't keep the carp in an area for very long. Boilies, big uns, regularly introduced, if you can possibly do so, is what you need. I really don't see any point in using small baits like 15s or 18s. You're only going to be feeding the bream. I go 24mm as an absolute minimum. Large 24mm baits are easier to get out at range, and you're far likely to be feeding the large carp that you're targeting rather than the smaller carp or smaller species. Don't be fooled into thinking that you need masses of bait and a very large budget to take on large waters. You just don't. It's always better to bait lightly, and then if there's anything left at the end of the session, then put that in at the end. That's going to pay dividends in the long runs in subsequent visits. So I realised after my first session on the river this year that the 18mm Scopex was getting absolutely mullered by the crayfish. Now, it's a lovely bait, but everything loves it, and straight out the bag it was just too soft as is. So that's a problem that I've got to fix. It's easy to crumb between the fingers. It's great, but that's not what we want down the river at the moment. So a few weeks ago I got some 24mm stabilised baits, and I've got them out of the bag, opened the bag up, got them in an air dry sack. These 24mm have been air drying for a couple of weeks, and they're much harder. Now, in the past I've found that sometimes just air drying baits for a couple of weeks is enough to overcome poisson chat and crayfish, things like that, but sometimes we have to take things to the next level. So the next level beyond air drying is something called salt curing. If you want to do salt curing, you've got a couple of options. If you're working with freshly made baits or stabilised baits, then you can simply take those fresh out of the bag, put them in a pot of salt or a bag of salt, and you can use Himalayan salt, you can use regular table salt, but it's important to work with dry salt. This is cheap wet salt. I really wouldn't use this for kind of air drying baits, but it's alright for kind of cooking particles up in. You want to use table grade salt or salt that's fit for a mill, or table salt, anything like that would be fine. You're trying to make these baits dry and hard, and you want dry salt to work with to do this. If crayfish are a massive problem for you, you might want to salt cure all of your baits, your freebies as well as your hook baits. I tend to only have to salt cure my hook baits, and I don't worry so much about the freebies. And you don't need to throw away that salt each time. You know, if you use large Himalayan salt in a coarse grain, it's quite easy to filter that from the big baits, pick those big baits out, and just keep on reusing that salt time after time. It certainly works fine. I already had air dry baits, then I spray them up with some Scopex hook bait spray. I could have used some Scopex syrup or any liquid that you've got to hand. Basically, it's just something to coat the baits to make them sticky. Then what we're going to do is we're going to sprinkle some salt over that. That sticky liquid is going to help the salt stick to the baits, and then the salt is going to suck all of that excess moisture out, and it puts a really kind of nice salty crusty finish to them. Extra hard, extra tough, extra robust, packed full of flavour. These things really do kick off a very powerful food signal. And you can see I already had quite a lot of Himalayan rock salt in there, and that's just gone all over those, coated them up. And I always dose these products into a tub because it makes it go farther, it stops any wastage. Of course, you don't need to use fancy Himalayan salt to cure your own baits. Regular table salt will do exactly the same job. It's just that I'm looking for absolutely every single edge that I can get. If you're fishing crayfish waters, then you're probably already used to carrying things like mesh or wrap or stuff like that. And yeah, I do have a stock of that, and if I need to, I will bring that out. But it's nice just to be able to use the air dried and the salt cured solution as my go-to option really, and then have other plans if things get really serious. So my home salt cure baits work really well for day sessions. If I was doing 24-hour overnight sessions, then I would take those, but I'd probably also carry some specialist hardened hookers as well, just to be on the safe side. There's nothing worse than winding them in the morning only to find that you haven't had a bait on for most of the night. So I've clocked up a number of sessions now on the river using those air dried and then salted seasoned baits, and got to say, absolutely delighted with them. They're working an absolute treat. No problem with crays, no problems with chub. Yeah, I've had a few chub. The chub are going to absolutely love them. Had some cracking carp, obviously, and yeah, working really well. The baits are staying intact, no issues there at all, and I can absolutely, leave them in. So those are the two rigs that have just done those last two carp I've had, and yeah, you can see the 24mm salt cure baits. Obviously they've done the business on the fishing front, but they've also survived intact, no mark, despite the fact that the chub were trying to play footy with them. Well, I don't know what to say about that. That's two absolute bangers this evening. This one's 32.8, brace of 30s on the river. That's rare. Bloody brilliant. For more details on how to tie this simple mono hair rig, click on this video.